Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone joining from across Asia Pacific, and good evening to people joining from the Americas. Welcome to this special Open Source Security Foundation Asia Pacific webinar, How OpenSSF is Combating Key Software Supply Chain Security Challenges. I'm Julian Gordon, the Asia Pacific VP with OpenSSF. I'm normally based in Hong Kong, but today I'm in Australia, and I am delighted to be moderating this event. We're in for a real treat today. The global community at OpenSSF, which is the Linux Foundation's open source security foundation, is doing amazing, timely, and important work to enhance the security of software supply chains. Companies and governments everywhere are urgently rising to this challenge. So today, you'll hear, amongst other things, how you can and should get involved in this vital initiative. And it is so great that we have three of the leaders of these developments here with us today to share their expertise and insights. We have the OpenSSF GM and renowned global open source leader, Brian Behlendorf, the OpenSSF Director of Security, Dr. David Wheeler, and VM or Vicky Brazier, Director, Senior Strategy Advisor, Open Source Program Office with our OpenSSF Premier member, Wipro. But before I introduce you to our distinguished speakers, I'd like to quickly run through a few housekeeping items. In a second, Brian will give us an overview of the amazing work done at the foundation, followed by Vicky, who will talk about the great work being done at Wipro. Then we're going to go into a panel discussion. If we have time, we will do Q&A. So please do submit your questions, via the QA button. You'll see it at the bottom of your screen. So please do put questions in, and we hope to answer those in the Q&A period. And we will answer them, a number of them, as we go along. And after the webinar, we will send you all a recording. So no need to take notes. So with that, I'd like to hand you over to our speakers to introduce themselves. We're going to go in alphabetical order. So we're going to start with you, Brian. Please, could you introduce yourself? You're on mute, Brian. Yeah.
Thank you. Rookie mistake. As Julia mentioned, I'm General Manager for the Open Source Security Foundation. I've been with the Linux Foundation for 6 years, but only in this role since October. And so really excited to share with you what we're doing at the OpenSSF and then be a part of the conversation.
David?
So I'm David A. Wheeler. I work at the Linux Foundation. I've only joined the Linux Foundation in 2020, but I've been working on how to improve the security of software or on open source software for literally decades. So I've been studying this for a while, and I'm hoping to be able to share some helpful information tonight.
Thanks, Dave. We're looking forward to that. And also something I think with a lot of great experience as well, Vicky, or VM.
Hi there. Yeah, Vicky's good. We're all friends here, right? Hi, VM Brasorio, you can call me Vicky. I'm at Wipro, a fabulous India-based company, although I, unfortunately myself, am not Indian. I've been in and around free and open source software for about 30 years now, probably about the same time, almost as much as you have, Brian. Lots of really great experience on this webinar that I'm looking forward to sharing with the audience.
Excellent, thank you. So I think, Brian, you're going to give us a quick presentation now.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you and share what we're doing at the OpenSSF. As I mentioned, I've been with the Linux Foundation for 6 years, and in that time worked with Julian on Hyperledger before moving to OpenSSF. And we really focused quite a bit on making sure that Hyperledger was a global community. The blockchain thing has been a very global thing, and in fact, we've seen a lot of use of distributed ledger technology and Hyperledger specifically in the Asia Pacific region, in India, in really everywhere around the world. But it takes focus and it takes investment. And so we at OpenSSF are really determined to work with all of the brightest engineers and really all the companies in that in this region to help move the project forward. So I thought I would tell you more about why the OpenSSF exists, what kinds of problems we're trying to address. I want to tell you a bit about the how, kind of our theory of what we're doing. We're not just writing software like most Linux Foundation projects. We're doing quite a few things. And then talk about the what, the substance of the different projects projects, the different working groups, and really help you all see what's going on. But to give some context, I don't know if any of you realize this, you probably do, but the number of pieces of open source software out there, the number of components has simply exploded. Back when I was getting started with open source software in 1991, long before it was even called open source, there were maybe a couple of dozen things you could download to set up a mail server or a DNS server, and things like libc and GCC and kind of some underlying tooling was there, and then web server packages like Apache and that sort of thing. But then things exploded, and things haven't stopped exploding. There are now, by some estimates, 40 million different open source software components available out there. And lots of them duplicate each other. Lots of them are very tiny. Some of them are very large and major, right? And on average, they do quite a few releases a year. In fact, the estimate is that by 2026, there'll be 420 million yearly releases of open source software, far too much for even a modest stack to stay on top of. I recently learned Kubernetes has thousands of underlying dependencies that it pulls in to build just for that one piece of software. Now, it's a pretty large piece of software, but staying on top of all those dependencies is becoming really, really a challenge. And what we've also learned from folks who are distributors of open source code is that the number of downloads is simply exploding, and trying to stay on top of all this is just really tough. We also know that this is not, whatever problems we have in the open source space are not limited to just those of us who work at the Linux Foundation or think of ourselves as open source developers or open source users, but really is an all of software problem. It's something that affects the proprietary package software you might see out there, the software that sits in a phone or that sits in a car. There's, for those of you might not be aware, there are Linux Foundation projects in the automotive space, in the banking space, in the electrical grid space. So open source software is getting everywhere. In fact, some estimates are that 90% of a modern application's code base is open source software, pre-existing open source software, and only 10% is the custom code. Now, it's a very important 10%, obviously, but we really have this security problem that affects the entirety of the software industry to whatever degree there's a security issue at the heart of popular open source packages. And in fact, as we've gotten better at discovering vulnerabilities in open source code and reporting them and organizing ourselves, we haven't always gotten really great at fixing them. In fact, another study showed that 29% of popular open source projects that, as they shipped with known vulnerabilities, either in that code itself or in the underlying dependencies. Even in the long tail of projects, 6.5% of those also contained known vulnerabilities. So this is really a problematic thing. And this isn't just a risk in theory. There's an emerging set of new attacks on our cyber infrastructure that come not just from the ordinary kinds of buffer overflows or hacked credentials or that kind of thing, but come from some of the unique ways that we in the open source community have been building software and building really a supply chain of software. That come from things like compromising the CI/CD infrastructure or bypassing code review for those projects that have code review. A lot of projects don't have code review processes, or typo squatting, where somebody includes a package they think they've named correctly, they're off by a little bit, and somebody else had put in a package that did something similar, but had, say, a cryptocurrency miner in it or something like that. So these are issues that have only come up in the last few years. And I think we're addressing now because open source software kind of came about at a time when there was a lot of trust between developers and the people using the code. It was fewer. It was a smaller community. You typically could get to know the developers behind Perl or the Linux kernel or Apache as individuals and trust them that way. But just that doesn't scale anymore. We need something better to address this. And this is really, again, a picture, if you will, of where those different attack points might be in what you think of as the software supply chain. And I want to highlight here, one of the biggest risks is just the fact that any modern component has, all these dependencies that it consumes, and keeping those dependencies up to date, and avoiding when an updated dependency does something crazy underneath your feet, which we can give examples of later. this is the problem that we're trying to address: is how systematically do we think about how open source software is built and improve the security of that. So the OpenSSF is really a cross-industry collaboration hosted at the Linux Foundation, very much like the hundreds of other projects that we host, that brings together all sorts of companies to think about and pull together an expert community around where are there these weaknesses in how we build code, and it might be in education, it might be in understanding, where is the next log4j likely to happen. It might be in the tooling that organizations use, but let's think about this and then start to go and systematically address them. And in fact, it has been doing this for about 2 years now. The OpenSSF first really got started in March of 2020, and it was October of last year that we really pulled together a set of funders and to go out and tackle some of the properly resource the fight against many of these kinds of things. So to talk a little bit about how we operate, we've organized ourselves into a couple of different working groups, but those different working groups speak to kind of these different approaches. First off, simply understanding what are the most critical projects out there in open source. And there we have funded research work to identify those, and not just based on things like stars on the GitHub repo, right, which is an easily gameable metric, but based on an understanding of what software depends upon what. So we've been working with the SCA tool vendors, software composition artifact tool vendors, as well as funding work at Harvard. We just released something called the Census 2 report to identify those. And then once we know what those are, maybe starting to ask, well, what are ways that we can help those projects in particular by adopting some better tooling, some better practices, that kind of thing. But first, just understanding who they are and securing those critical projects is important. The second is trying to identify common tooling that would help those. And by tooling, we mean not just code scanning tools, but also tools like the Security Scorecard project, which we can talk a bit more about, which is a systematic tool for looking at a repo on GitHub, and it could be extended to others, to ask things like, are you pinning your dependencies? Are you doing fuzz testing? Are you doing some of the other basic good practices in software engineering that tend to lead to more secure software? And if you do, you score highly. If you don't, you score low. And it's hopefully a way to help guide people towards these in these better directions. Another big part of what we do is educate. David Wheeler, who you'll hear from soon, along with some help from some of the others in the community, developed some free courses that we have put up on edX to basically help teach in the course of a 40 or 50 hour kind of chunk, how to be a software developer who writes more secure code, how to think like a hacker to some degree, how to think like where are the weaknesses, where are the assumptions I'm making that might be invalid assumptions, or help me understand when I'm, delivering a set of things that are actually kind of dangerous and could be misused or might be hard for me to properly secure. So education is a big part of this, and it's in that courseware. There's also some guides that we've put out around coordinated vulnerability disclosure, and so what happens when somebody shows up to your open source project and says, I found a really bad bug and it should be fixed. What process should you go through to get that fixed in the most graceful kind of way for your user community? Right. Getting in and actually fixing bugs is also really important to us. So we know that in the course of what we do, we're going to find projects that are under-resourced, that haven't had even a third-party audit or code review, that know of some CVEs within their own code, or simply some dependencies that they need to update. So part of what we feel is important is going in and actually helping fix those bugs and help the community of those who do handling of vulnerabilities and the like to be more systematic and informed about how they work. The final thing I'll draw out is we think it's important to talk about standards and tools that support those standards. So you'll see mention of something called SALSA in a little bit. SALSA is a standard for tracking the status of components as they move through the software supply chain and how trustworthy those components are, so that at the end of the day, you pull these pieces together, you can get an aggregate picture of the overall risk in this package that you're about to deploy. That's one kind of specification we see potentially evolving to a standard, the way that another Linux Foundation project called SPDX evolved the SBOM standard for software bill of materials into something that became an ISO standard. So all of this is really important to what we do. And we've organized these efforts into working groups that largely map to those different domains. And I touched on some of the different things, the different work products that are coming out for those things. I don't have enough time to go into depth on all of them. In fact, I think we'll have a chance during the Q&A to highlight some of our favorites. But they're all very active, and a lot of them are about creating code and thinking about software and tooling and where that might matter. But so many of them are just about how do we just help us as open source developers be more thoughtful and informed about both how we write code, but also how we consume code and how we choose what software to build on top of. That's a really critical thing. I'll also mention we have started to add to this working group structure a set of special initiatives for which we go out and get additional funding and set up as projects within the OpenSSF. One of those is called Project SigStore, which is essentially a toolkit and a specification for signing software artifacts, so that when you get this component that it actually came from the developer community who released it, because it has their signatures all the way through the however it's come through the pipeline to you, rather than what's usually the case, which is the signature on the last mile, right? The Debian package or Ubuntu package or Apple App Store signature, that kind of thing. This is about moving those kinds of signatures up the chain and having a system that's kind of like Let's Encrypt for more easily provisioning signature keys to be able to sign those packages. It's taken off like wildfire. It is becoming embedded inside of some major systems out there. The cloud native community has adopted it very widely. We're also seeing the Maven Central repository is going to start publishing packages and asking for those signatures from the package submitters. So that's really cool. The final one I'll mention as a special initiative is something called Project Alpha Omega. And Alpha Omega is focused on resourcing a team, and we're actually have 3 job descriptions up now for these roles, but a team of specialists who can simultaneously work with the most important open source projects on a very consulting kind of basis to help them raise their game in terms of their adoption of many of the other different OpenSSF tools and otherwise, but really humbly approaching them going, how are you doing security today? How might we help you raise the bar on what you're doing? And then the Omega side is trying to cover the long tail of open source projects, scanning those for new vulnerabilities based on things like, well, we discovered this bug in Log4j based on this kind of thing. How many other software packages out there also exhibit that kind of issue? And so with Alpha Omega, we're really just getting started on this, but we're really ambitious here about creating essentially an open source team that will go out and help all these different projects raise their level of security. And all of these projects work together. They're all aware of each other. Part of the goal of putting them into different working groups is to encourage them to think about where they meet up with other projects. SigStore, for example, works very closely, has a lot of overlap with Salsa. And the teams working on those have worked together to create a reference implementation of something called the Secure Software Factory. That's pretty exciting. Some of this is way upstream at the developer end, teaching them about how to be more secure software developers, right? But then some of it is way at the tail end of this. How do we make the package managers and the big distribution points more secure in how they operate? So it really is all over, and it's sometimes I lovingly call it a circus, but that's because there's so much goodness and so many different kinds of things happening within the OpenSSF. And I just want to give a little bit of a acknowledgement to this is happening as part of a context of a whole lot of other security initiatives happening across the Linux Foundation, lots more than I can go into today. This is not meant to say, hey, no one else in open source needs to worry about security. We'll do all the security stuff. This is very much about making sure that every open source project is thinking hard about how it manages code, thinking about what practices they adopt, how to write more secure code, and resource their own security teams. We want to be in a capacity building kind of mode where we're really can spread out and be active across a wide array, both of their Linux Foundation projects and other open source projects far beyond the Linux Foundation. So we are very fortunate to have some support from some amazing organizations. Each of these organizations here has made a major financial commitment as a yearly membership in the organization. I want to thank in particular Wipro for that. But as you can see, it also represents a very global set of companies, many of them obviously based in the United States, but representation here from organizations headquartered in Europe and a few in the Asia Pacific region. And we certainly are hopeful to build more representation from the region. As well our other members who are also participating and putting developers in, putting some financial resources in. And as you can see, also some membership representation from Asia Pacific there. And with that, really, we are an open book. We do all of our work by Slack, by email. Each of the working groups has a conference call once every 2 weeks. We are working hard to think about how do we adjust the timing on a lot of those calls to be at times that are more accessible for Asia Pacific, but many of them already happen very early in the morning Pacific time, so later in the evening Asia time, because we know that we want to be at least accessible to people around the world. One of the other things we really want to focus on going forward is internationalizing the content that we create, translating that to other languages, translating the website, that sort of thing. And that's an area that we could also use some help if any of you are interested in helping with that. But please, if this is of any interest as a contributor, as a developer, come to the OpenSSF website. There's more to learn there. And if you're a company thinking about how to help your community, your employees write more secure code and be more thoughtful about how they consume open source code, we'd love to talk to you and maybe even have you come in as a member of the organization. So with that, let me take a breath and pass the baton back to Julian. And I don't know if there's been any questions so far, but I think it might be good to move on in the agenda.
Yeah, I think we've got a few questions coming in, so please, people do bring those questions in and we'll answer them as we go along. And if any new ones, we'll answer them at the Q&A. And now I think we're going to go to Vicky, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the initiatives and work that's been done at Wipro. As Brian said, very much, thank you very much for being contributing to OpenSSF. We look forward to hearing from what.
Well, we are very happy to be here. So I'll try and keep this very short because I think the most interesting part for all of this is going to be the Q&A that will come later and what my fellow panelists will have to say as well. So as most of you know, Wipro is a very prestigious and well-known older Indian company. We've been around for more than 70 years now in multiple incarnations. And throughout our time as a technology company, we've always had really strong focus on technology. We've had great technology and security teams and capabilities. So we do this not only because it's important to our customers, which it certainly is, but it's also important to us as a company. We really believe in doing the right thing, and that includes ensuring that our customers and all of our stakeholders are safe. And I want to give a quick shout out here to my colleague Vinod, who's in our attendees right now, and Vinod's team does an excellent job. They're a great example of the people who are doing this for us. So if you ever want to know anything about open source and security, Vinod's a great place to start. So as some of you might also know, in 2020, we got our first non-Indian CEO, which was a big change. Thierry Delaporte, he took the reins as Wipro's new CEO in the middle of a pandemic. So, bless his heart for doing something so difficult. That really shows that he's up for a challenge, and he's been doing some great stuff since he came on board. So along with the change of leadership, naturally, as you know, as these things change within leaderships and companies, that brings a lot of other change. And part of that was an evaluation and a sharpening of the corporate strategies and priorities here in Wipro. And it became really obvious early on in that process that supporting security efforts for the overall software industry was really, really critical to our customers and to their continued success and to their customers, right? We really are so customer focused that we see, as Brian pointed out, just the rising tide we have of these vulnerabilities and of these bad people taking advantage of them. And it's our responsibility to help our customers be safe. And so security is going to be really key in that. So as pretty much all software, as again, Brian showed, it's all relying on open source. 90% of your average software out there is open source, right? It's those open source components, those bricks that are put together. So as pretty much all software now relies on open source, Wipro being a part of increasing the security and the sustainability of the open source ecosystem, it is absolutely critical. We see this as so fundamental to doing the right thing. This also presents a great opportunity for Wipro to use our existing security knowledge from people like Vinod and our capabilities of him and his team to help lead the overall direction of securing open source. So naturally, as soon as we had the opportunity to do so in our strategic planning, we joined OpenSSF. And this shows our commitment to this effort, we feel, and we're also excited to just contribute. We've got a lot to offer as a company. And by helping the community, we're also helping our customers. This is just a great situation for us. And hopefully it also ends up being a great situation for OpenSSF and especially for the entire open source ecosystem. So I'm going to hand it back to you now, because I think we've got a lot of really great questions lined up that I want to get to, and so we can answer these for our attendees.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. That's great, right? And let's talk about that rising tide and what we're going to do about it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
The flood hitting us. So I think the first kind of question which I have to all of you, right? Is basically what are the key open source software supply chain security challenges today? How urgent are these, and where do you see? Maybe you can give some examples on how you see this rising tide, this challenge that we have today. So shall I go to David first?
All right, first unmute myself. Okay, so I mean, there are multiple challenges. I think one Brian's already emphasized here, which is scale. When there's only a few open source packages in the world, you can handle things in a different way than when you have millions and millions. And it's not just that there are millions and millions, is that there's many interdependencies. A depends on B, depends on C, depends on D. There's a widely circulated XKCD cartoon which shows that you may bring in something and it looks fine, but you're not aware of the supply chain. You're bringing in some component that's many tiers deep that perhaps has some issues. So I think scale and the dependencies which bring in a scale that you might not be aware of is one challenge. I think another challenge, and so I think tooling is going to be an important part of that to deal with scale. Another challenge is education. I don't have as good figures internationally. I can certainly say within the US, and I think within Europe as well, the vast number of software developers really aren't taught how to develop secure software. They're not taught how to look at software when bringing it in. And it's that lack of knowledge that causes many other troubles. And as Brian's already mentioned, we're working on that problem as well. And of course, we've got clever attackers who are trying to exploit this. And the good news though is that we do have increasing information on how they're being attacked and what we can do to counter those attacks, to make the risks not no risk, because all of life has risks, but bringing them down to far more acceptable levels. Others?
Do you want to add to that, Brian?
Hard to even add. I mean, one thing that has changed quite a bit from just I'd say in the last eight years or so from historically in open source is the rise of really tiny components. The rise of, say, a component that's 100 lines that has one or two functions and is written by one person. and that one person, sometimes they're really diligent, not just thinking about security, but also thinking about the community dynamic too, and making sure they find somebody else who can answer issues or push out an update so that if they go on vacation, right? But a lot of times it's that one individual, and they start to feel a bit of this pressure to be the maintainer, to be the sole support provider, rather than thinking about, how do I make this a social thing? How do I combine my one piece with 5 or 10 other pieces and build a community around this, and then have enough buffer and enough people around to make this thing be a living thing, right? So we have to think about tooling, we have to think about standards, we have to think about ways to help these small components, because that's where I think a lot of the biggest risk is right now in open source. And I think those are distinct from thinking about like Log4j, what led to that and what was difficult about dealing with its aftermath. I think that's the other thing I'd throw in is, even when we find a bug and we think we have a fix, and sometimes it takes a few iterations to get to the right fix. Now going out and patching everywhere is really hard, is really for organizations that don't have a great handle on how they're using software, which frankly is most of them. And so finding Log4j, remediating it, updating it has been a major source of pain. And it was funny to hear so many organizations go, well, we're not affected because we're using Log4j 1.x. The bug was in 2.x, but 1.x has been out of support for 5 years and had known issues in it. So, really, I think we have to think about this tail end of the development supply chain as much as we think about the upstream.
Okay, excellent. Vicky, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to build on that because Brian really ended up in a direction that, great lead in, Brian. Thank you for that. So a lot of our focus and a lot of what we talk about in OpenSSF and in general in open source and these security conversations are about the open source side, right? The modules, the projects themselves. But as I work in the industry, one of the biggest problems I see is actually at the other end. I mean, obviously, the problems at open source and the vulnerabilities and helping developers learn how to do this correctly, as David pointed out, and how to make and write secure software and how to work with researchers and how to patch things appropriately and get the word out there. That's super important. We're doing a lot of great work on that. And what I see, like boots on the ground, the biggest problem is that kind of discoverability of companies and organizations, their own software supply chains. So when a Log4j does come up, they have no idea what is in that supply chain. Is Log4j one of them? And so discovering these things and knowing what is in their supply chain. So if you're looking at your supply chain, when a link breaks, that's a problem. And if you don't know, you're gonna have a big problem with, like, say, you're not going to be able to update your Log4j quickly enough, and then somebody will take advantage of it. And so that discoverability of the supply chain, I think that's something that we really are starting to pay a lot more attention to, especially in OpenSSF. And there's a lot of really great, what I'm seeing, some good cross-project collaboration, not only within OpenSSF, but outside of it as well, as they're starting to collaborate with SBOMs, for instance, SPDX and OpenChain and things like that. And that sort of collaboration to help build that end-to-end solution from discoverability to the remediation of the vulnerabilities and everything in between. So that's really been interesting, seeing these connections get made just in the few months that I've been working with OpenSSF pretty consistently and a lot, but I've already been seeing these happen, and it's just going to be great for the overall industry.
It's amazing how things are being pulled together like that. And I think the slide that Brian shared just beautifully, you call it the circus, right? I think that's great. So actually, just take a little step back. Do we see the kind of these challenges, the vulnerabilities are affecting any particular industry or country, or is this just generic everywhere? What's the kind of feeling on that?
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
I'll jump in. Everywhere. I mean,
all right.
In order to have a modern society, you need automation. To have automation, you need software, and so it truly is everywhere.
Yeah, we're seeing so the financial services world has stepped in and participated in open source in the Open Source Security Foundation quite well, quite deeply. Folks from JP Morgan, from Citi, from other organizations are aligning how they do IT and security in that industry with so many of the standards coming out. We know that healthcare companies are affected, and we haven't seen much engagement from them. So I'm knocking on some doors and trying to raise some awareness there. And finally, we do see governments also very interested in what's going on and recognizing, they use this critical software to run their tax offices, their permit offices, their, all sorts of critical infrastructure as critical as bridges and highways. So when the Log4j bug hit, that triggered a lot of people in the United States and the US government to go, is there something systematically either wrong here or we should be doing to help avoid the systematic cost of this, not only for government IT systems, but for US industry. And now we're starting to see other countries start to knock around and ask about this as well.
I think one of the great values that Wipro brings to this is that we do work in so many different industries and so many different verticals. We work a great deal in financial services and healthcare, and we do help governments as well, but we also have manufacturing, and we've just got all of these different areas that we work in. And everyone we talk to, all the account managers within Wipro, they're all concerned about this sort of stuff, right? And so this is not just one region. This is worldwide. This is cross industry. This is across academia and governments. This is a concern because open source is so foundational to everything. And it's not just in one area. It's everywhere. And it's very important that we all pay attention to this.
Yeah, I should quickly add that I've had a number of interactions with LF Energy, energy distribution, particularly electrical, because any of these other critical infrastructures that are important for a society, again, they all depend on software.
Yeah, everything's software now, right? So even crypto and other worlds, right? Everything relies underlying on open source software. So what are the key ways in which the OpenSSF members and community are collaborating to help with this challenge opportunity?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, I alluded to this a little bit when I suggested the specific kind of tools that we use to collaborate. They start with conversations. They start with folks saying, here's a domain like education where we think we could do something. And then it takes folks stepping up and saying, here's the beginnings of something. What do others think? So an example of this would be the Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosures Guide that we came up with. I forget where the first couple of drafts of that came from. I think it was some folks at Google, if I recall correctly, David. Or was it GitHub or somewhere else? Do you know? Do you happen to remember?
For the
Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure, the CVD.
Okay. Well, okay. The Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosures Guidance.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I'm sorry. I don't mean.
Sorry.
No, but it all starts with somebody saying, "Here's something I'm passionate about. Here's something that I think needs some work." Maybe it's something they've already created for an internal audience or for one of their customers, and they go, this should be opened up. This should be shared. And so things like that, things like the educational materials David worked on and the community gave input to, all of this starts with an idea and with a group of people within those working groups or even beyond. In fact, we're now looking at adding a 7th working group focused on software package managers and those folks at the tail end of the distribution span, and what are things they might do in concert across Maven Central and PyPy and Rust crates and all these others to coordinate more effectively. But it has to come down to conversations. In the best of open source traditions, it has to come down to individuals. Companies certainly put their individuals on the job. We're very grateful to Wipro for putting VM and others from Wipro on many of these different working groups and projects. And that's but a lot of it comes from individuals with no other connection to us showing up and saying, I think the world needs something like this. And our job is to try to channel those energies into productive outputs. David and I and others at the Linux Foundation were more like air traffic control, but the real substance is being created, most of the time at least, the real substance is being created by all of the organizations involved in our community.
If I may add, Brian's already several times the word circus has come up, but there is method. There is method to the madness, as it were. Fred Brooks wrote a very influential paper decades ago about software engineering called "No Silver Bullet," and I think that very much applies here as well. There isn't just one thing that, hey, if this one little thing was done, all security issues disappear completely. It's just not like that. There need to be multiple efforts working together in order to make progress on that. And so as a result, we have an entire foundation, OpenSSF, working on a lot of these specific projects, and indeed coordinating with specific projects, say in the energy sector or finance. They, of course, are going to have to take additional steps specific to their situation. Make sure that their software is written securely and so on. And so really this is going to be an effort of many people collaborating together. But the good thing is that, that's how open source works in general, is through collaboration.
Okay, great. So I think I'm going to ask now, of those initiatives and all the things, which is the most eye-catching initiatives that's coming out of OpenSSF? What's the, I hate to use the coolest, maybe, or the best, or however you want to call it, the one that's going to make the most impact? Maybe I'll ask each of you, and I'll do this in alphabetical order, just to make it clear. So Brian.
Well, I thought it was pretty cool when we managed to get 1,000 of these hardware devices out, or coupons at least for them, out to maintainers at the top 100 open source projects over the course of winter break as kind of a Christmas gift, because these things help with implementing multi-factor auth, as it's called, so that we can help protect against accounts being stolen, credentials being stolen, which is an attack vector out there, and this is starting to be required now. I think NPM requires their top 100 or 200 projects now, the maintainers, to use multi-factor auth. So it sounds small, but it was very horizontal thing, and it's one of the cheapest things we can do to improve the security. And it gets to, I think we'll be successful partly with like our big grand vision stuff like Alpha Omega, but so much of the culture inside of OpenSSF is about practical things we can use today, things we can do today to improve the security in open source.
Okay, I love those. So are people going to be asking how they to get one of those? So David, what's your initiative?
I'm going to answer two ways, although let me first caveat with, this is asking a lot like which of your babies is is your favorite. So I think we're all going to squirm a little bit because in fact we need them all. That said, I think coolest in many ways is, I think for a lot of folks are going to look at this Alpha Omega project, where the Alpha side, they're going to trying to really focus on a couple, really critical projects of what's sometimes called white glove, or really giving a specific hand, and also trying to improve ways to search for vulnerabilities. But I think coolest may be the wrong question. I think higher impact really is now, and I think Alpha Omega, there's some experimental parts. I think it has a lot of potential. And perhaps I'm biased, but I think courses on how to develop secure software may be one of the bigger impacts, because I think in the longer term, we're going to have tools. We're going to have lots of other things. But unfortunately, it's been demonstrated over and over again that giving tools to people who have no idea what they're doing, there's a phrase called "a fool with a tool is still a fool." And so we do need tools. We do need all these other things, but we do need to improve the various mechanisms we use. But we also need better educated developers. And so while I don't think that it can be just education, I think without any education, it's not going to work out well either.
Okay, so that's education from a doctor. That's good.
I think that's reasonable enough.
Yes, very, very, very reasonable. And Vicky?
I mean, everybody's mentioned Alpha Omega already. So, I mean, it is certainly the new hotness. And so therefore it's the epitome of cool. And it is going to be very, very great once it gets going, but we're just starting with Alpha Omega. And so it's a great time for people to join and to start participating, because literally the first call is in 2 weeks. Right. So this is the perfect time to show up and to start participating, because Alpha Omega is going to really revolutionize security and open source. Right. It's going to be that big, but that's in the future. Talking about right now. David's talking about education for, and learning courses and stuff like that. I'm thinking more shift left, which is similar to where he's going, right? Like security, you make it earlier, and earlier is going to be getting to these people and helping them know how to do these things. Well, there's lots of people involved here. There's the developers, there's the users, there's the researchers. And so the Vulnerability Disclosure Working Group is doing some stuff right now that you can pick up today and share and use and make a difference. And that's going to be the CVD, the Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure Guide, which helps open source projects with templates and how to learn how to manage your security world, right? How do you have your contacts? How do you interact? How do you disclose these things at all? That's something that is going to make a huge difference if you can get the word out there in a more effective manner. But what they're working on right now, what they just started, this working group, is speaking to the researchers, the other side of that equation, which is how can you better reach and better communicate with open source projects? And that's going to be so incredibly valuable. And that's something that I don't think we spent enough time on. And I'm just so glad to see that. And it's going to be a really powerful thing. And again, that's another one that's just starting now, but because there are researchers already working within that working group, we've got great people there to provide the information and to guide this. And so we're going to be launching this at some time sooner rather than later. I won't take away the big, reveal on that, but just started working on it. So again, great situation for people to just come in and chime in and make a difference like today.
Okay, excellent. So there's some wonderful things going on, right? And lots of new things. So and we're kind of coming to nearly into the last 10 minutes. So I'm going to ask actually, maybe how do people get involved? You talked about these wonderful things, right? So I think that's the key, the crux to what, how do people get involved? You've got these working groups, you've got these activities. Obviously, we're in Asia Pacific predominantly here, and we have, some people have language barriers. Some, we're at the wrong time zone. And thank you for getting up late. We appreciate that. But I think we'd like to do some things in our own time zone here, but obviously with that globally rather than having fragmented. So how would people, whether they're a business, whether there is a developer or a government agency, how should they get involved, right? And this isn't just for members, this is an open source community, right? So how should people get involved as individuals, as governments? So Brian,
sure. Let me tackle that, because on top of the fact that of many of the things I mentioned were very focused on individuals getting involved, right? Through the working groups, the mailing lists, we have everything documented on GitHub, and that's if you live and breathe GitHub as a developer, you'll understand what we're doing there in terms of process and using the issue tracker there to kind of manage outstanding issues in the working groups and that kind of thing. And we probably use Slack more than we should. I understand Slack is not always accessible globally, and we're very interested in exploring alternatives. In fact, we do have a WeChat group to reach those in China who want to participate. So some of this is about tooling, talking about organizations, about companies. We have a membership model, so companies can join as members, 2 different tiers, and there are benefits to that. Mostly it's about putting your logo on the website and as a kind of a thank you for the work we do, and we keep you updated on how our priorities are and how we're spending the money and that kind of thing. But that there's no special code benefit to being a member. We're not limiting or giving a special security service or anything like that. But we do want to engage with our members and their own security teams and help educate their own organization. So if that's of interest, let us know. The one thing I do want to highlight, though, is we know that working internationally is very limiting if you want to treat everyone as if they were, all sitting in the same room. One thing that we did with Hyperledger that seemed to work very effectively was, for some countries, we created basically a satellite team that was volunteers that were kind of we called them the technical working groups. One for China, we had one for India on Hyperledger. We haven't set those up yet for OpenSSF, and I would like to. I'd like to see if there are some really leading people in different regions of the world who realize their job is to help advocate for OpenSSF and connect the communities there. I don't know how many of you are getting back to doing face-to-face meetups. I know we're a long ways from that in some countries, but in others, things are starting to open up, at least right now. And so being people who are willing to help drive some of those meetup communities in different regions, but really just help, get over the language barrier, get over the time zone barrier, get over the cultural barrier, and help us connect with developers and companies in those spaces. We'd really love to hear from you if you're interested in helping us in that way. And this applies to any country, because every country is different, as we all know.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you.
if I could add to that, I mean, everything that Brian said, plus all the working groups and many of the larger projects also have mailing lists that you can sign up for, and and at least find out what's going on, communicate back, work with. He mentioned GitHub, of course. That's not just issue tracking, but actually allow the work. You can propose changes, review things, and that sort of thing. Um, a few groups are already looking at, I think there's at least one group that's already doing, my apologies, I know there's a name for it, but the name for it's going on, but basically where we have meetings every 2 weeks, but we shift the time so that sometimes it's better for Europe, and sometimes it's better for Asia Pacific. So alternate so that that increases the ability for people in different. There is no time zone that's good for everyone. It's just it's the way it is. But trying to make it so that everyone can participate, I think is the key thing. If I may just add additionally, um, what does the OpenSSF do? Well, we have a certain goal, but in terms of specifics, so much of it is just driven by the people who care. If you have a good idea, share it. If either you or someone else says, "Oh, I really want to contribute and work into that," um, that's really where things get energized. Just instead of just saying, "Wouldn't it be great if something happened?" Moving to look here, I'm willing to work on this and help, and who else is willing to work with is really how a lot of things get happening.
Okay. Excellent. So yeah, please do get involved. If you're in this time zone, please reach out to me or anybody in the community. And I think I'd love to see, as Brian said, we have a technical working group in China, we have a chapter in India, we have many meetups. Obviously, we haven't done that because of the physical world, because of COVID. It's all virtual, which actually may be easier, but not so easy in other ways. So definitely do reach out, and it's open source. So basically, come forward. So the other things that I would like to look at is maybe let's answer some questions, right? We've got a whole bunch of questions coming in. Do any of you, I know David and Vicky and Brian, you've been answering any questions. Any ones you'd like to pick out from the audience?
There's one I wanted to highlight. The link to the courseware was identified by Hirash. Thank you very much for that. But I did want to emphasize, so the links, the courses right now on edX are free to take. They do cost money, and this is an edX requirement to be certified. There's like an exam that you take to get a certification, and you can prove that you've received that. We are working to bring the price down on that. I don't want to discourage you from taking the courses, certainly do that. But it's our goal to get the price on those certifications to be much more affordable. There are some hard costs with doing this, but our goal is to get as low as possible. Let me just leave it at that. I don't have anything to announce yet. I'm going to wait on that until we can confirm. But please feel free to take the courses and watch this space for when we offer lower price certifications.
Any questions, David, that you want to answer from the list? You're mute. Great mute button.
There we go. Oh my goodness, there's so many here. Let's see, information about security testing. We've already talked about Alpha Omega. We also we have various projects to encourage good practices, anywhere from the courses teaching how to do it. The tools group has some guidance on selecting and using tools. The best practices badge and the scorecards projects basically are two different ways to evaluate projects and strongly encourage the use of various kinds of tools. We also have projects to try to improve the tools themselves. So for example, the CVE benchmarking initiative has a whole bunch of test cases for testing primarily static analysis tools. And the fuzzing group has fuzz introspector, which is used to help us evaluate and improve fuzzers. So we've actually got quite a bit going on. And oh, there's so many questions here. I wish I had time to answer.
I think there are so many. So I think what we'll do, maybe we can take some of those, we can answer them, and maybe when we send out the email, we can answer some of those questions, some of the specific. And I think we'll come out with where the working groups, where the training is. We'll try and give everyone a kind of, what's what. I'm not going to say circus, but I just did within the environment. So I'm now going to ask a quick round robin question. Sorry, Brian, did you?
No, there was another question that I wanted to answer just real quick, which was what? Okay, should there be rules that software vendors list out open source software that they used for a customer to reference, like labels on packaged foods? And yeah, and this is the point of the software bill of materials concept. And there's a couple of different standards out there for this. The one that has been in development for a while that the Linux Foundation is behind is called SPDX. And this is for both security, knowing what's inside and being able to check signatures, as well as for license conformance. So you can know, hey, the code that I pulled together are all the licenses compatible, and are they compatible with my company standard for what open source licenses we use. So I really encourage you to check out SPDX. That's not technically an open SSF project, but we plan to help that community quite a bit over the next little while. So just wanted to highlight that.
Okay, I'm just going to go with one lightning round question. So between 1 and 10, 1 being bad, 10 being good, right? How successful are open source software security challenges being addressed today? And how well will the cybersecurity challenges have been mitigated in 5 years? So how much today would you say 1 out of 10 are we doing? And how well are we doing in 5 years, 1 out of 10? So Brian, I'll start with
to go first. All right.
All right, sorry, we'll go reverse.
That's okay. Yeah, that's fine. I think we're at about a 3 right now, to be honest. Okay. I mean, if you look at in the census too, the list of top 100 open source packages and these couple different ways you slice it, very few of them have even done the best practices badge, which is so easy for a project to fill out. So we're at 3 right now, and I think if we work really hard and all pull together, all adopt a common set of standards, I think over the next 5 years we can get that to a 7, maybe an 8. But I really want people to surprise me. Maybe we'll go higher too. So yeah. So
a 3 and an 8, you said?
A 3 to an 8. Look, 5 years is a long time in open source. So yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing for the next 5 years. I don't know about the rest of you.
An 8's a very lucky number here, so 8's good. So David, what are you?
I'll buy Brian's numbers, but I want to explain why. Okay. And that is, I think saying, hey, there are literally millions of open source projects. Some of them are doing spectacularly well. I give them an 8, 9, or a 10. But there's a whole lot that are not doing well at all. And frankly, that's not just true for open source. That's also true for proprietary. As I mentioned, vast number of software developers, they never heard, nobody told them, and so they're not doing anything because they don't know what they should do. So we've got if you with a couple tens and a whole lot of ones, your averages move quickly down closer to 3 than to 10. But so I think that as we can increase knowledge, tool use, encouraging the the switching to, yes, I'm going to detect a defect in one of my dependencies, and I am prepared to rapidly update, and I'm going to apply more best practices. I think we actually can get up that average up to a 7 or 8.
Okay,
Thank you.
excellent. So it's a 3 and an 8, and with good reasoning. And Vicky, so do you agree?
I don't think it's possible for me to put numbers on that, to be honest. I really don't. But I tend to be pretty skeptical about these things because I know I've done way too much research into humans and change.
Okay.
Shall we say? And I think there's this is complex. This is a sociological thing that we've got to deal with. And human beings, the world round, are difficult, squishy things, and it's going to be a real challenge, I think, to get that many people to all move in the same direction, even if it's not in a standard way, at least in the same direction. So but it's never going to happen if you don't try. So that's what we're here to do, is to try to make things better. And I think we will at least do that. What that looks like, I am not willing to say. I am not a futurist.
All right, excellent. That's a great way to end it. And thank you. I think, and actually, it's up to everyone here, right? Everyone in the open source community, you can get involved. Please do. Asia Pacific is an important part of the global community, so please do get involved. This hopefully for many will be a start of a journey to help us move to an 8 or 9. As Vicky says, it's up to us as a community, right? So with that, I think we've hit the hour. Actually, we've overgone our hour. So I'd like to say thank you to David, particularly for being up. It must be nearly midnight now. Thank you very much to Brian and to Vicky. Thank you for all listening, and take care. Keep safe. We've still got challenges around the world, so please keep safe. Take care and look after yourself. And thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Bye-bye.
Bye.